The winds of change are howling. I'm talking about estate and asset protection planning. Hi, this is Paul Hitchcock, and welcome to this eye-opening episode of Wealth Protector TV. Really excited to have the founder, Harry Barth, of Barth Calderon, asset protection, estate planning, business planning law firm, who is going to break down exactly what's going on in the world of estate and asset protection planning. There are massive game-changing proposals on the table out of Washington right now, things we haven't seen in over 50 years, tools and strategies being taken away. So you're not going to want to miss this one. Grab a pen and a piece of paper, take some notes, it's going to be great. Let's go take a listen. First, want to say I'm Paul Hitchcock, and thank you everybody for joining. This is an episode, very special episode of Wealth Protector TV, because we have our host Eric Freund here. I'm going to let Eric, you introduce yourself. You're with the producers group, of course, and then we'll get to Harry and a few maintenance issues. So Eric, let us know who you are.
Great, I appreciate it, Paul. And what Paul didn't mention is Paul is the business development specialist for Barth Calderon Attorneys, which Harry Barth has been a key figure of for decades now. And Paul is a really dynamic marketer and branding specialist, and he helped put this event together today. So thank you, Paul.
Thank you. So, nice words, yeah.
I am Eric Freund. I'm the managing partner of the Producers Group. We've worked with Harry Barth for more than 20 years. Over that time, we've had quite a bit of successes, from estate planning cases to asset protection. We've worked with a handful of advisors together, and what we're hoping to do today is to really dig into the current tax situation, because what we know is that the pending tax proposals are significant, and a lot of the people that we work with and that we know are going to be affected. So we'd like today to uncover for you what some of the possibilities might be that we could further get on the line individually with Harry, with yourself, and the client when necessary, and talk through some different strategies. So I greatly appreciate both Harry and Paul being our hosts today, and please take it away.
Thank you, Eric. And I want to share my screen very quickly here, because Harry is going to talk about a lot of substance today, and he's not going to be able to address every single question that you might have. We may have a little bit of Q&A at the end. Certainly you can type questions in the chat as we go along if something is triggered by Harry. But if you want to get one-on-one with Harry and the team for follow-up questions on anything you have going on, either your own planning or you're an advisor helping clients, we love giving back value. So you want to text Guard Assets to that phone number, and that will give you a chance to get on the calendar with the team, get input from Harry and the team, and we're happy to do that. So take a snapshot of that, write that down. I'll put it up in the chat also. Let me stop my share here. And with that, I want to introduce Harry. Very excited to be able to do this. Harry is the founder and senior managing partner of our firm, Barth Calderon. We've been around for over 30 years, and we're focused on asset protection, estate planning, and business planning. And we have a national footprint with 5,000 clients across the country. We put on about 40 workshops a year. Harry is our top speaker, and he is in huge demand across the country from many incredible groups, including Vistage International, the Women Presidents Organization, Tiger 21, and many others. And look at this as sort of a master class, because Harry's going to break it down, and Harry is the one to do it. He was one of the first certified financial planners in the country. I think Harry number 6, and has just about every advanced degree you can imagine, a doctorate, 2 master's degrees, and everything else. And so we're listening to the right speaker here. And so with that, Harry, take it away.
Well, thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. And good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you for another version of Wealth Protector TV. Well, we have a lot to talk about today, but a couple of things to think about as we get going. First of all, remember the old story of the Greeks. In the Greeks, when the messenger came, if they didn't like the message, they killed the messenger. So you may not like my message, but let's try not to kill me today as I deliver this message to you. So so remember, just think of another adage. The power to tax is the power to destroy. Now that may sound very interesting to you, but you'll see how this comes to play with what's afoot. Now, I'm going to break down what is proposed by various different legislatures regarding today to the estate and gift tax systems. If we have any time left over today, maybe we'll deal a little bit with new and evolving COVID liabilities and how we can protect ourselves somewhat from that. But let's understand some things. When we talk about estate taxation, it doesn't affect us. It affects our children. Unless you're the child, then it affects you if it's coming from the parents. And let's understand something else, that the legislation as proposed has not yet been enacted and it's not law. And it's not for certain that it will become law, but our intelligence tells us that there will be significant changes, most likely in the areas that we're going to talk about today. We think that although they're going to be masked under paying for infrastructure and other socially responsible bills, the main concept behind the estate tax is that, and this is not a political conversation whatsoever, is that the Democrats feel, or we call the left-leaning Democrats feel, that wealth is concentrating in the hands of too fewer families. That we have, they like to call it, the wealth is not being spread around. The wealth concentration, they believe, is not good for America. Now, for many, many years, 50 years or more, they've been trying to find a way to allegedly break that down to get what they call more income equality, because they feel that right now, income inequality. Now, why am I talking about this? Because, yes, they've tried it in the past. And for most people that have worked hard, and I mean worked really hard, paid your income taxes, took all kinds of risks, signed all kinds of personal guarantees, and my God, you were successful. That should be rewarded. Instead, they're looking for a way to break it down. Now, so what's happened in the past is people have turned around and said, well, you propose this legislation. We have good advisors. We'll hire good advisors. We have good tools, and the tools that we have will help us keep intergenerational wealth moving from generation to generation. So the goal of breaking down family wealth has virtually been non-existent. Wealth is still concentrating in the hands of a smaller number of families and not so much spread around. So this time it's a little different. Why is it a little different? Well, first of all, we have the White House, the Senate, not a filibuster-proof Senate, but Senate and the House are all blue and pretty much unified in the proposals that we're going to discuss today, which are significant. So, and let's also understand one other factor that, people came to America for so many, many years, from a business perspective, because we always had relatively stable tax policy. But now we are experiencing something kind of new, and that is tax policy is being interwoven with political strategy, and which leads to these potentially wild gyrations in tax proposals. And since they've been unable to achieve stability, most of the tax proposals that have been put in place over recent years have not been long-term, but been short-term, from 5 to 8 years as far as that was concerned. So let's talk a little bit about what some of the proposals are and where we stand today. So back in, let's say 2017, beginning of 2018, the tax law went into effect, which gave an exemption, and there's estate taxes and state death taxes. Let's just call it transfer taxes. How much do we have to pay to the government to transfer wealth from one generation to the next. Don't worry about the legal names. It's a tax on the transfer. So America, to keep us competitive and for many other reasons, and the cost of planning is significantly expensive, those limitations were raised. So about 95% of Americans didn't fall within that transfer tax environment. For a husband and a wife, or a husband and a husband, or a wife and a wife, that umbrella of transfer exemption, as we sit here today in July of 2021, is $23 million. Now that 23 million can be leveraged, and we'll talk about how to do that. But we could pass $23 million, a husband and wife, or $11.5 million if we're single, to the next generation without the imposition of a transfer tax. And the current transfer tax rate is anything above the 23 million or 11.5 million, 40%. So if someone's got a $33 million significant estate, and we were able to pass 23 million to the children, we still have $10 million subject to transfer tax. And believe it or not, the transfer tax rate is $4 million, which is a lot of money. We have to talk about various techniques that we could use to help mitigate that. That's the environment that we see today. Now, another thing that's very important to understand about that environment is that at this period of time, the transfer tax at death, that $23 million exemption that we have, is also the same amount that we can give during our lifetimes to any number of individuals without the imposition of a federal gift tax. So the old story is, if you give it away during lifetime, and you're over 23 million, we'll take 40% of that, to make a gift. So if I want to if I've used up my 23 million and I want to make a $10 million gift to my children, I have to give $4 million to the government for the privilege of transferring $10 million. Kind of sounds icky and awful, but it is icky and awful. But today, and for the last number of years, last decade or so, the amount of the gift tax, the lifetime exemption, is equal to the death time exemption. So I think it's really important to understand what are some of the options and some of the things we face. Now, since November, when the political landscape changed, our firm has been working very, very heavily with literally hundreds of families on the transfer of intergenerational wealth. And so I'm going to share with you the myths, the secrets, so to speak, and the concerns of what families have in dealing with this. And hopefully we walk away a lot smarter at the end of this hour than we did at the beginning. Well, first, let's take a look at, they don't enact the law. The law stays as it is. Possibility. So one decision that we all have at all times is on intergenerational transfers is do nothing. We all have, that's a decision, do nothing. Maybe the tax laws are going to change. Maybe the political landscape's going to change. Maybe it's going to get better. Maybe we won't die before the change comes. That's a do nothing decision that we currently have. But we have to remember that baked into this 23 million, a lot of people don't realize it is going to change anyway, whether or not we have a vote in Congress and the president's signature or not. So let me explain what that means, because a lot of people don't recognize that they're unit focused on the $23 million. Well, when the Republican administration, Trump administration, passed the tax legislation, they didn't have 60 senators that could agree to that. So they use a process which is known as budget reconciliation, which is kind of a temporary means of increasing taxation, only requiring 51 senators, but it's temporary. So as a result of the legislation that went into effect January 1st, 2018, which gave us the 23 million, it was a sunset clause in there. And so for everybody, all of us in the land, that $23 million turns into about $11 million on January 1st, 2026. So if nothing happens, no Biden, no Congress, turns into $11 million. So that means if anyone or people dying, and there is no estate tax or transfer tax between husband and wife, after January 1st, 2026, that the amount of the exemption for a husband and wife is $11 million or $5.5 million. That's our best guess. It reverts actually to 10 million, but there was an inflation adjustment. And not 23 million, maybe more like 24 million, 24.5 million, depending upon how inflation has moved up over the next number of years. And the rate of taxation remains at 40%. So someone who has just had $20 million today, net worth. Now remember, net worth is everything we own, especially life insurance is included if the life insurance is not encapsulated in a irrevocable life insurance trust, which we'll talk about a little later. Today, God forbid we lose, we're passing intergenerational wealth, and we have 23 million, we pass 20 million, there is no transfer tax. January 1st, 2026, if we have $20 million and we have an $11 million exemption, we have 9 million automatically subject to transfer tax and a $3.6 million tax. So as I explain that to our clients as we sit down, they don't recognize that change, vote or no vote, that is coming. In order to not to happen, we would have to most likely have a red White House, a red Senate of at least 60 senators, and a red House. And then they'd want to have the gumption to take it up at that time in order to make modifications to the federal transfer tax. So that's coming. And the other thing that people don't recognize, especially many people in businesses, real property, and other assets, may be appreciating between now, 2021, and 2025. So a $20 million estate could be a $23 million estate. So therefore, an additional 3 million at 40%, another $1.2 million. Okay, that's that part of the landscape. But there are no changes to the unification. The gift tax and the estate tax are the same. And we have a 2025. We have a little bit of a runway to work on it and use our tools to help you mitigate that taxation problem. However, we do have the proposed legislation. Now, the proposed legislation, I repeat again, is not law. But let me tell you what the proposed legislation is. And there's more likely than not an opportunity for that legislation to pass in some form because of the blue White House, the blue Senate, and the blue House, albeit probably also again under similar temporary budget reconciliation rules. So under the new rules that we're talking about, and this is what becomes so important in the runway that we have left this year, that $23 million exemption, all right, drops all the way down to $7 million. $3.5 million for each spouse, or if single person, $3.5 million. And then the rate of taxation increases from 40% to 45% to start. And rather than being flat, it's graduated up the 45, 50, 55, 60, as high as when one gets up to a very, very, very large net worth. Believe it or not, the government wants to take 65% of everything that's being transferred from one generation to the next. You kind of get the picture that they're trying to destroy wealth in this. This is not legislation, I think, that was designed to raise revenue. This is not legislation that's being designed to pay for infrastructure, although it's trying to be sold that way. This is legislation that is being put together to try to break down the concentration of wealth in families. And good, bad, or indifferent, to me, that's the way it points. So in that same scenario, if someone had $20 million worth of assets, and we have a $7 million of exemption amount, that would leave $13 million subject to transfer tax, and use an average 50% or $6.5 million that would have to be paid in transfer taxes under the new legislation that's imposed. Well, it gets a little bit worse than that as we move on. So that alone is enough to really give pause. And one of the pauses that we think about is, what can we do about this egregious confiscation of wealth. This is the largest tax increase in America, this package, since 1942. 1942. And again, remember its purpose. One of the other things that is being, again, proposed, but not necessarily adopted, is a bifurcation or a division between the exemption amounts that we have at death and the exemption amounts that we can give away during lifetime. As I told you earlier, oh boy, we got that, $20 million, $23 million that we can either give now or use it at death time. Under the new legislation that's proposed, not only is it down to $7 million and 45% starting rate above that, the amount that we can give away during lifetime is divided and is limited to $1 million. So if I want to give away more than $1 million to my children now, I have to pay 45 cents gift tax in order to do that. They're no longer unified. So basically saying that tool, the tool that we have is let's give it away today and have all future appreciation in our children's estate, is pretty much evaporated under the legislation as proposed. Now, so there is something else that I think that's really important to understand as well, and that is in addition to these, we'll call it egregious rates. In addition, like right now, we are able to give away $15,500 per year without using up any, about $23 million, to any number of individuals as what we call a gift of present interest. Under the proposed legislation, we as individuals would have no more than $30,000 total that we could give every year. So if we have 6 grandchildren, we'd have only 30,000 to divide, not 15,500 for each grandchild. So one of the other things that is occurring here is not just an attack on the amount that we can transfer without transfer taxation, or amount of gift that we can give without gift taxation. It's an attack upon the tools that we use to help you. Many of the tools that we use to help you, which have helped generations of Americans transfer wealth from one to another, are also under attack. So certain things such as interfamily discounts. So under current law, we are able to take a discount in valuation if we own an entity that we don't have full control of, or it's not liquid. It's not worth the same as a liquid asset in the bank. We were able to take a discount on our state tax returns. Interfamily discounts are considered to be eliminated. Another thing that we have is in certain states, we could set up what is known as dynasty trusts. So there's no estate taxation from we pay it once and we don't pay it again for generations to come as long as the trust lasts. And in some states like South Dakota, a trust could last in perpetuity. In Nevada, 365 years. California, maybe 91 years. But under the new proposed federal legislation, every 50 years, a trust stops, it's fully taxed at the full extent of the law, and then moves on to the next generation. So dynastic trusts as we know them disappear. Now, what do we do? What are the things that we can do? So we have a lot to talk about here, and so I want to share some tools and techniques. Now, in addition, we talked about enactment. Now, enactment is very important. When do these new rules come into effect? Well, assuming that they're passed. This is the big assumption, assuming that they're passed. And we don't know the form that they're going to be passed, if at all, but more likely than not, some of it will be adopted. When they were introduced into the Senate and to Congress, we were told that these new exemptions and rates would not take effect until January 1st, 2022. Okay, we had a little runway to work with you to help us do any intergenerational transfers or other tools and techniques that we had available to us that we could utilize now and get them implemented before the end of the year to take advantage of the generous rates that we have now, which I don't think we're going to see again for quite a while. Then we hear, as we go down from what I spoke about a couple of months ago, well, that maybe the exemptions and the rates will come into effect on January 1st, 2022. But the tools that you guys use to help you, those are going to be frozen for the utilization on date of enactment. So in essence, what they're saying is that, yeah, we're gonna change the rates, against you January 1st, 2022, but maybe in August of 2021, we're going to take away the tools that your planners will use to help you take advantage of the rules that are available this year. Then we hear from some of the potentially more, we'll call it radical members of the legislature, that they would like to see some of this legislation retroactive to April 21st of this year. Now, my humble opinion after almost a half century of practice is that as far as gift and estate taxation tools that we would utilize to help you, seeing retroactive implementation, the chance of that is almost nil and none. But there are a couple of other proposals that are floating around. One of those proposals, one that some that may have legs, is that as far as step up in basis is concerned. So what happens in America today when someone dies, the basis of the tax basis of an asset steps up to the fair market value on the date of death, and therefore capital gains are only paid above the new basis which occurred at the time of death. This is one of the trillions of dollars of very, very, very strong and for many, many years stable aspects of the United States tax code, a step up in basis on death. Well, I can assure you that that is being scrutinized highly. And in the proposals, one of the proposals is to eliminate the step up in basis on death. So the children or the next generation would take our basis in assets for the purposes of calculating new capital gains. And that's really interesting because one, it's hard to calculate that basis. And two, that would be a significant tax increase that would even hit small, moderate, or medium-sized businesses and families along the way. They've tried to enact that before, most of the time without luck, but this time may have a little bit of legs on it. But at least the way that we understand it is that tax would not be imposed until there was a disposition of the asset. Asset gets sold, we got to pay the tax. Our tax basis is what our parents' basis was. We got to pay a capital gains tax on the differential. So, but what is the capital gains tax going to be? Well, of course, California and other states impose a taxation. The California is 13%. And then right now, the federal tax is 20% on capital gains. Well, Mr. Biden and team have proposed a 39.6% capital gains tax rate, the same as the ordinary income tax rate on capital gains over $1 million. So depending upon the exceptions that may get built into the law, if someone sells a business, worked all our lives, or worked all of our lives, paid income taxes, took risks, signed guarantees, all the things we do, worked 60 hours a week and had our business grow. We get a good offer, we sell it, all right? And now they wanted to take 39.6% of everything above $1 million in basis. Absent an exception for small and medium-sized businesses, that would be horrific, and no one's going to sell anything in that environment because not only would they take 39.6, California would take 13. It's like 54, 55% tax. Who's going to sell into that environment? Very, very bad. The other little proposal that's floating around in there, if that's not making us nauseous enough, is that they want to impose a capital gains tax on the intergenerational transfer. So if I have a piece of property that I bought for $100,000, I die and leave that property to my children and it's worth $1 million. When I die, they will impose a capital gains tax on the difference between the $100,000 and the $1 million, whether I sell the property or not. And then if there's any left, that would be subject to federal transfer taxes on top of it. So this is just a storm of, I would think, fiscally and tax policy insane ideas in Washington. And we do hope, sincerely hope, that the vast majority of this will not be adopted. Now, let's turn our attention now for the time that we have left on options, on what we can do. And there are so many things to cover. So hopefully everybody will take us up on a consultation, ask questions, and allow us to help do a deep dive and analyze everyone's situation to determine whether or not intergenerational transfers are proper and how they can be done. It's very intricate, and there are many, many, many options. I'll share a few with you today. So one option we talked about all along is do nothing. All right. And for many people, that's an option. They do nothing. Hopefully, some fiscal sanity or tax policy sanity will come back. We will outlive it. Our kids are said, everything is okay. If it goes to the government, it goes to the government. And that is a decision. Tax policy has been volatile. The next scenario that many people do, because it's relatively simple, is they buy life insurance. Life insurance is used during a period of time we get it at death, we pay for it today, and if we can get a chunk of life insurance, which now becomes dollars, to pay the tax man, then our estate can move to our children and the next generation without impairment. A very, very, very good idea. Now, however, there are a couple of factors that are involved. One, although the estate tax does not affect me. My wife and I will never pay estate tax. We'll be dead. Paying a life insurance premium does affect us. So we have to make a decision that we're willing to take money today out of our budget to purchase life insurance, which will be payable at the time that the estate tax is payable, to help pay that burden so our estate can move in total to our children. Remember that there are a couple of factors before I get to the life insurance for a second, that paying the estate tax is interesting. It's a line in the sand. It's drawn 9 months from the date of the second death. We don't have to have a sale. They don't take property. They don't take credit cards. It's cash. So the cost of the estate tax of trying to pay for the transfer tax is sometimes a lot higher than the tax. So, the old story we heard, estate sale, that means they sell it on the cheap. I got to sell 5 buildings off or 5 pieces of land off within 9 months in order to satisfy the government transfer tax rules. I am not going to get the best market value for my assets. And not only that, what if we're in a down market during that period of time? I don't have the time to wait out a market cycle for the all those things to rise back up so I get the best utilization of the dollar. So estate tax could be not only the tax, but the cost of paying the tax could severely increase it. And we're not even talking about whether or not assets have gone to probate because of improper basic estate planning transactions that have done. It is a storm of trouble that's faced ahead in the absence of appropriate and proper planning. So now, if we want to buy life insurance, we have to think about something else. So the question is what a lot of people don't realize, if we own the life insurance that we buy, and I see this 80% of the time, Harry buys a life insurance policy on the life of Harry and Tess, and to be payable on the second of us, the two of us to die, because that's when the estate tax will be due. And the ownership of it is Harry and Tess. And we buy a policy for $5 million. All right. It's expensive. We bought it. We're paying for it. It's okay. But guess what? The life insurance itself, that $5 million death benefit, is included in Harry and Tess's estate for federal estate tax purposes. Oh my God. So in other words, I have to pay 40% of the $5 million, $2 million to the government for the privilege of doing that. So if the life insurance is structured that way, that is true. However, the proper way to make the acquisition of life insurance, should we utilize that technique, and it's only one of the techniques that are involved, is to do it within an irrevocable life insurance trust. By constructing an appropriate and proper irrevocable life insurance trust to hold life insurance, which was acquired for the purpose of paying transition taxes, it will be not only income tax-free, which all of us think life insurance is tax-free, it's income tax-free, but would also be not included in our estate for federal estate tax purposes and using the full $5 million. So I think it's really important, also from an asset protection perspective, to make sure that our life insurance is well crafted, well designed, has proper ownership, and is not included in our estate. I think that that's very important. It also plays in with some of the other techniques that we're going to talk about. So we have another way that the people are beginning to tackle some of the issues that face, and that's the use of philanthropic means. the use of charity. So let me give you an example. So if I sit around at someone's estate plan and says, hey, look, what's ever free from federal transfer taxes, and for God forbid if you live in Washington or Oregon that impose state death taxes or New York, which just makes it even more egregious, whatever is subject to federal estate, not subject to federal estate taxes, that goes to my children. In trust for my children, in trust for my grandchildren, with all the bells and whistles that should be built in to appropriately and properly designed basic estate plan. And everything that would be subject to federal transfer taxation goes to the Harry and Tess Barth Memorial Foundation. All right. And by doing that, there is no federal transfer tax. So if Harry had $30 million worth of assets and I had $23 million worth of exemption, my children would have $23 million. The other $7 million would go to the Harry and Tess Barth Memorial Foundation, which would be lit up at the time of our deaths and not subject to transfer taxes. There would be no tax payable to the federal government. And then my two children could be the managers and the trustees of that foundation and receive income and salary for running that foundation for generation after generation after generation. We've all heard the Gates Foundation, the Buffett Foundation, the Clinton Foundation. The words go all, and sports figures have foundations. Foundations are probably the winners in this tax debacle that we face. But I think it is a significantly good program and technique. So then, if Harry and Tess have $5 million worth of second to die life insurance in our life insurance trust, my children would get the $23 million. They would also get the $5 million that they would get from the life insurance because there's no tax to pay. The foundation would get $7 to $10 million, and my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren would do good things because grandpa and dad were successful over the course of his life. This is being utilized quite a bit by many families who are philanthropically inclined, and we'd be more than happy to discuss with you how that works and how it's done. And remember that we also can purchase, again, second to die life insurance to replace assets to the children, estate tax free, for the assets that may be going to the family foundation. So let's take another step further to something that I think is very important. For those people that are married, we have the ability today to still lock in the $23 million before it evaporates through the use of what we call inter vivos or living spousal lifetime access trusts. Through the proper construct of spousal lifetime access trust, we would be able to obtain the following benefits for you and your family. But we have a very, very limited time in which or runway left with which to do this. So what inherently the net result would be is that I would, instead of using my $11.5 million exemption at death, which is evaporating perhaps January 1st, 2022, I use it now. So I make a gift to my spouse of $11.5 million, all right, for the benefit of my spouse and children. And I do that with my separate property assets. If I don't have separate property assets because I live in a community property state, I make separate property assets through the use of a transmutation agreement. And now my wife could be, for example, the trustee of that trust and the primary beneficiary. She could use income and principal as needed for her health, education, welfare, maintenance, and that of the children. All of the assets that I will now have used up my $11.5 million today for the benefit of my spouse. And then all of the growth of that $11.5 million. So if it becomes 15 million, 16 million, 18 million dollars is fully exempt from federal transfer taxes. Matter of fact, if structured properly, would be fully exempt from state death taxes as well. So we could start with 11.5 million. It could grow to 25 million. On death, there'd be no taxation on the spousal lifetime access trust. In addition, from an asset protection point of view, the assets inside that trust would be exempt from the claims of third-party creditors, and it is not a self-settled trust. My wife, on the other hand, would settle a trust for the benefit of myself. doing the same exact thing, 11.5 million from my spouse to Harry, and then it grows and, and things of that nature. But there's something you have to be very important and very cognizant of when we're dealing with that. It is a complex legal procedure, and the trusts cannot be identical. There's a doctrine called the reciprocal trust doctrine. If Harry sets up a trust for Tess, Tess sets up a trust for Harry, and we both put $11.5 million in it, we're each other's trustees and the beneficiary. It's the same thing. The federal government under that doctrine will just collapse it and say, it's the same thing. You just switch names on a piece of paper. There really was no interspousal gifting. So when we craft trusts like that, should you elect to bridge or take advantage of that exclusion before it evaporates, the trusts have to look different enough, settled at different times, different amounts, different assets, different rules and regulations for the children, different trustees, sometimes different dates and different states, to make it so that they are different enough to pass that scrutiny. And we, I think, definitely know how to do that on your behalf. It also presents a couple of challenges. Remember, it's a spousal lifetime access trust. So Harry's access to the pile of money in Tess's trust is through Tess, and Tess's access is through Harry. So hopefully we're getting along. If we don't get along and it splits up, well, I guess it's 50-50, it's okay. But if a spouse predeceases another spouse, it presents a problem in that now that other pile of assets are for the benefit of the children and no longer necessary for the enacting spouse, which gives us an opportunity to how do we fix that? And that the trust itself could buy some life insurance for the other spouse if it makes some sense to do so, to reimburse the other spouse for the loss of those assets. Not a bad technique to utilize and understand. And we would both have asset protection, the growth of the assets within the silo, and lock in the $23 million that we have today. Many of our clients are utilizing that. One other downside, which is perhaps a downside and not, and let me analyze that with us together today, and that is we don't get the step up in basis for assets that have been gifted. So we will not see a step up in basis on the assets. They'll keep the carryover basis for each of the assets in the spousal lifetime access trust silos. Now, to me, when I compare a capital gains tax versus federal transfer taxes could be 45-50%. I believe that capital gains tax will never hit the 39.6, but could be 28, state 33 or 34. And the other thing too is that most likely it'll be due and payable when we have a disposition of the asset, not when we draw a line in the sand 9 months from now. So we have those opportunities. Now, by the way, all of those are tools. Those tools, as well as grant or retained annuity trusts, sales to intentionally defective grantor trusts, and other estate freezing techniques are also under attack in this legislation. So this is just a horrific amount of legislation that is really designed to hit the tools and to destroy intergenerational transfers. Now, I know some of this may sound a little complex, and a bit of it is. And I also know that it sounds pretty draconian, fire and brimstone, and it is. And we sure hope that this does not get enacted. But it is a great time. In some respects, COVID has had, in many cases, a depressing fact on interest rates and a depressing impact on valuation, which helps us very, very much, because whenever we make transfers, we have to prove how we came up with values. Another challenging aspect of intergenerational transfers. So what are we recommending? So let's talk a little bit, and then maybe Paul will drop in. We may have some questions that we want to answer in the few moments that we have left together. So what am I saying? This is a lot that came out of my mouth today. And what I'm suggesting to everybody really is, and for those advisors that are with us today, for your clients, let's take a look. Let's take a look and see what assets we have. Let's see what their basis is. Let's see what the values are. Let's see whether intergenerational transfers make sense. Let's see how, from doing nothing, buying life insurance, using charitable and philanthropic foundations to using more sophisticated spousal lifetime access trusts, sales to intentionally defective grantor trusts, or just plain gifting trusts to children, which will a lot of people do. Just let's make a trust for our children, give them a gift depending upon the size of their estate, and let's make that transfer now while we still can. I think that's great planning. And I think that it's something that we should all look forward to. So that's step one. Runway is short. So if we're going to do something, we should take a look at it sooner rather than later. And basically, that's the information that I wanted to give to you. Now, one little other, we'll call it appendage, that we need to talk about for those of you in California, we have another concern. And the concern is that in November, there was another horrible piece of legislation that passed through the California proposition was Proposition 19. Under Proposition 19, basically took away the parent-child exclusion on the transfers of property from one generation to the next. So even if we have a piece of property, a fourplex, a duplex, a house, a rental property, a couple of rental houses that are making up our estate significantly that we want to gift to our children, under prior law, in many cases, we would have been able to make that gift to our children without the property taxes being reassessed from the value that you may be carrying, which is the value at the time that you bought the property with a few minor adjustments, up to now they will reappraise or reassess the value and increase the property taxes significantly. So now, even though we've given it to the children can't afford to hold on to the property because they can't raise their rents high enough to pay the new property tax that came as a result of the gift. So we won the federal gift tax war and lost the California Proposition 19 war. Just thrilling and wonderful. However, there are some techniques, very, very, very short runway left to the use of proper utilization of limited liability companies, which was not impacted by Proposition 19, which could give us asset protection around our properties and give us a pathway or a potential pathway to transfer properties from one generation to the next without a reassessment by the assessor's office. So there's a mouthful or a lot of things for all of us to consider during this very, very, very challenging time. And I am not today, maybe we'll do it together in another episode of Wealth Protector TV, going to talk about COVID-related liabilities and new COVID-related liabilities as a result of vaccination programs. And with that, I say thank you for joining me this morning. I look forward to talking to as many of you as possible and helping the families at least achieve a sense of you've evaluated everything properly to know what to do or what not to do. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Paul, and thank you all very, very much.
Yeah, Harry, Eric is going to address some of the questions, and I do want to say I'm seeing people are texting already to sign up to get some information,
Right.
and just know that when you do that, you get access to a calendar link so you can pick a day to get it right on your calendar, and it comes to me initially, so that's what that's about. Eric, you want to take it away?
Sure. Harry, thank you. You did cover an awful lot of information, really important information. Again, we will put up at the end, after we answer some of these questions that have come through the chat line, we'll put up the phone number where you can text to get on calendar with Harry for a consultation. I really recommend that because, as you can tell from what he's covered, there's an awful lot of information here to get through. So let's cover a few of the questions that came through. Ryan's asking, if your spouse is the owner of your life insurance policy at the time of your death, does this avoid the inclusion of the death benefit proceeds being included in the estate and therefore avoid estate tax too?
Well, simple answer is no, because what happens is that the under current law, the estate tax is a second death imposition. So you die, the proceeds come into the estate now as money. Wife is the owner of the life insurance policy. On her second death, that money is just included in the estate, and you will be subject to estate taxes. If it was owned by the children, that would have been a different story. But if it's owned by a spouse and we have second death consideration, absent some spousal lifetime access trust where it would be included in the estate.
Thank you. And Valerie asked, what's the least amount of net worth that a family could have in order to create a foundation?
Well, that's a really good question. And there's a lot of scuttlebutt about that. So there are basically two channels for that: foundation, foundation light. The foundation light is the use of a donor advised fund. And the use of a donor advised fund kind of mimics a foundation, but doesn't have employees. We could do that with $1,000, $5,000. But I would say that as far as a private foundation is concerned, I would, it's just a subjective number. If we're not utilizing at the time of death at least $500,000 or more, it really, the cost benefit isn't there in forming a private foundation. And by the way, private foundation is probably the last great tax shelter left in America.
A little bit of a follow-up question to that would be, what would be the minimum, or what's really the target market that we should be looking for as far as net worth in order to create a spousal trust?
Well, spousal lifetime access trust, well, let's just make it simple. If we have net worth excluding life insurance, which hopefully we've now gotten out of the estate, and we take the worst scenario of the imposed or the legislation that is proposed, I would say that we need to have a net worth somewhat north of $7 million, but if it be $23 million for sure, because if we lost the 23 and went to 7 and we have a 7, then it's just the increase of the values over $7 million. So I would think that you're looking at, 17 million, $18 million, 9 million per spouse makes some sense to do it. Other than that, there are other techniques that make some sense to freeze values, if we still can, in the estate, because if we have a $7 million estate today and we have a $7 million threshold, then, oh, I forgot to say one thing. This is really important. Glad we brought it up. We have a $7 million threshold. There is no tax. But as that 7 million grows to 8 million, 9 million, 10 million over the years, if we live long enough, we have a tax on that 3 million of 45%. So we're creating a tax, just by the appreciation. Under the legislation that we have today, for at least 15 years now, the estate tax exemption has been adjusted every year based upon the consumer price index. So if we have a rising inflation, we would get a rising exemption. So if we had 7 million today and now we have 8.5 million 10 years from now, the exemption may have risen to 8.5 million to cover that. So we're not paying tax on inflation and growth. Under the proposed legislation, this is really, really insidious. There is no inflation factor built into the 7 million or into the $1 million gift taxes. So in essence, it's a declining exemption rather than an appreciating exemption. Very, very bad.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Sharon has a question. She said, if the spousal step up from the death of a spouse that occurred before this, that step up is lost?
No, it's
That's
kept.
her question. Then
It's kept.
It's kept.
It's
Okay.
kept. It already has it.
Okay, so she further asked, if the house was in a trust, moved out of a trust in a refinance, then put in a new trust, that step up is completely gone? Is the
No,
question?
that has absolutely nothing to do with step up at all. Those trusts traditionally grant those trusts and have no income tax benefits and or detriments. Is the same.
We have a couple of advisors on the line that I know work with ranchers and or farmers. Specifically here in California, I wouldn't be surprised if there's others on the line that I'm not aware of that might know some in other states. Is there anything different in regards to the net worth or the structure of a family ranch or a family farm that we should be keeping in mind?
Yeah, that's a really good question and really highly dependent upon lobbyists in Washington. Even under Proposition 19, we had an exemption for $1 million for a family farm. Not very much, only $1 million. So, but the valuation of the land is important. Usually its value is farmland and not its highest and best use. So we don't know. We don't know any idea on in the new legislation. If you drop they're supposed to be some exemptions carved out that have not been defined for how you pay that draconian estate tax for a small, medium-sized business or family farm. Because if you impose 45% estate tax on a family farm, you end the family farm. What they've done in the past is they've given 15 years to make payments. So that just puts another imposition on the family farm. So we don't know whether or not there's going to be a carve out. There should be a carve out for a reasonable amount for family farms and small to medium sized businesses. This is all part of the horse trading that's going to take place in Washington. And truthfully, I don't trust in one of them.
I agree. I don't know that we have any other questions. I'll look real quick.
But the run from Ryan Bennett there at the end?
Okay. Ryan asks, what's the minimum value of a property in California transferring from parent to child that would be appropriate to bring to your firm to look at regarding the Prop 19 issue?
Well, I think that the Prop 19 issue is kind of defined. You got simple thing. After February 16th, 2021, Prop 13 disappeared. Prop 19 replaced it. So what you have is there's no longer an unlimited homestead exemption on leaving the house to the kids, which we had before. There was no value. You could have $10 million house, leave it to the kids. There was no reappraisal, and increase in property tax. Now it's $1 million, of an exemption, but only if the children remain in the house after the transition. And then the foolishness, as I said, there was a question proposed to the taxing authorities. Well, if you have 3 children and only one child wants to continue to live in the house, and they said, well, all 3 have to live there, where you don't get the exemption. So I would say that in California, if we are looking at transferring property other than a house to the next generation, we do it through the cascading LLC techniques, which are really good and can provide the means of transferring property from one generation to the next. There were things in Proposition 13 that are not in Proposition 19. Now, they're highly technical and highly legal. I'll take a small stab at it here for the group just for a second. Under Proposition 13, there's something called the step transaction doctrine that tax people use. They're saying that arranging assets in such a way in steps that allowed property to transition from family A to children B would not be considered a wrong transaction. Proposition 19 didn't take away our ability to do the steps to make the change, but Proposition 19 did not have the specific exclusion about the step transaction doctrine. So we're a little bit in a gray area, a little bit in the dark there. So a little bit of risk, but it's the only alternative we have. To me, any transfer from parents to children of any property or gift should be evaluated properly before being done to see what the alternatives are. So I don't care if it's $100,000 or it's $100 million. We should take a look at it. And with that, I think we are close to the end of our time. I'm going to leave the audience, Eric, with you and Paul. I know there are a bunch of other questions in the chat. I love doing these for everybody. We are going to, Paul will probably, very shortly, do a webinar regarding COVID and COVID-related liabilities. And I can assure you that's a fascinating conversation that all of us should take a little opportunity to listen to for asset protection. Well, Eric, Paul, thank you so much. I really appreciated being with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry.
I'll coordinate with Paul that we do this again this summer and do a follow-up and maybe take one topic and dig in deeper.
Yeah, and Eric, I'd say that I think putting together an educational program, we've got a great response here for your people, our community. So everyone, thanks for jumping on. Eric, thanks so much for your efforts in making this happen also. It was fantastic.
Thank you, Paul. Everyone have a great day. Make it productive. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.